So the agenda for this webinar is as following. We're going to go over a bit of a background around strategy planning, around performance planning, and about budget planning. And then we'll have a discussion about why should budget and performance align. What are the benefits of aligning budget and performance? We're going to recap this once we understand how these actually align. So we're going to cover how do budget and performance align from three different perspectives: planning, execution, and closure or review. And finally, we'll conclude with the potential steps to move forward. Once we understand the benefits, then how we can actually implement this in our corporate. Just some technical notes. You may use the questions box on the webinar tool in case you have any questions throughout the session. I'll try to address these on the fly. And also, we're going to present you with a few questions along the session. We'll really appreciate your response on these. These are optional, of course, but we'll appreciate your response on these. So let's begin. So a little bit of a background around strategy and specifically around strategy planning. So what we found out is that a substantial budget is allocated towards strategic planning or a compilation of a strategic plan within the corporate. It usually involves consultancy firms which employ a variety of methodologies, strengths, weaknesses, etc., strategy maps. But usually the end result is that the plan doesn't get to the operative level or the practical level. We usually end up with the high-level components of the plan, the vision, the values, objectives and drivers. In some cases, we do get to high-level activities and communication plan. But again, as I've said, in many cases, we don't get to the operative level. Now, the high maturity level corporates, one of the first things that they would do in order to get to the operative or practical level is to basically define the way that they would measure the success of meeting these goals. So they can basically know whether they're actually meeting these goals or not. So the method to get to that is by defining KPIs. So we're going to try and define KPIs on both the objectives and as well as the subjective manners as well. So I mean by when I'm saying subjective manners, I mean employing methods such as surveys, etc. But the guidelines towards well-defined KPIs is to follow this acronym SMART, or even smarter. Some would add additional criteria. So SMART KPI is basically about a KPI having to be specific. So we need to have clarity around what the KPI actually measures, and it has to be specific, okay, and not ambiguous. The second thing is that it has to be measurable. So we need to be able to measure the actual values around the KPI. It also has to be achievable. Okay, if a KPI is non-achievable, then it can be quite discouraging. And I can say that one of the difficulties in implementing these performance management or performance measurement processes is basically to get the buy-in of the people, so they don't feel like they are, being monitored, rather than they should feel like, they're part of driving the corporate forward. So achievable is quite an important aspect of the KPI. It has to be relevant. Now, by saying relevant, what I'm really saying here is that it has to be part of the strategy. It has to align with the strategy. If we measure virtually everything without a relationship to the strategy, then we will spend, useful time or costly time on irrelevant measures, basically. So it has to be relevant. And finally, it has to be time phased. Okay, so the realization of the KPI must include a time dimension. We have to say that we're planning to get to a certain achievable goal within a certain time frame. Now, as I've said, some would add additional criterias, which are very important. So the first one is explainable, which is quite similar to specific, but it's just to perhaps emphasize the importance of the KPI being very easily understood, and that different people won't translate it differently. So in terms of communication purposes, it has to be understandable, easily understandable. The next thing is that it has to be relative, okay? Because we're talking about actually adaptive KPIs, about dynamic business. As the business grows, we have to be able to easily fine-tune our KPIs to accommodate business growth. And finally, it has to be assignable. We have to be able to set ownership on the KPI. And this is a key element, and we're going to touch this later on throughout the presentation. Okay. Now, before we move on, I'm going to show you a quick question. I'd appreciate if you'll be able to answer this one real quick. So I'll give you a few moments to answer this one. Okay, thank you very much for this. So let me move on. So I just want to give you just a couple of examples for what do I mean by smart KPIs. So I'll use an example for a smart KPI and an example for a non-smart KPI. For example, if we're talking about an increase of customer base objective, and we've defined the KPI to get to a certain amount of new premium clients within the quarter, then we can see that this KPI meets the specificity criteria, because it matches a certain strategic objective. It's also measurable. Okay, we're probably be able to get this figure from our perhaps CRM application. It's I haven't defined an exact figure here, but let's assume that it's also achievable. Okay, we don't pose an impossible challenge around this. Okay, as I've said, it's also time phased, right? We can see that we're talking about premium clients within a quarter, and it's also relevant. Okay, it's part of the strategy. Now, sorry. So this would be an example for a smart KPI. Another example, which is the ratio of if we would like to measure the reverting employees or the employee retention. So if we would compare the numbers of employees left versus the total number of employees, this is not a specific KPI. It's also not time phased, but let's assume that it would have been time phased. It's not specific because we don't have a clue on whether the employees have left willingly or not, right? So these are just very basic examples. Let's move on. So basically, we've covered some basics around the strategic planning and the performance planning. Okay, the performance planning part of strategic planning. And now I'd like to move on to budget. So budget plans, when I'm talking about budget plans, I'm talking actually about the very basic means to allocate corporate resources toward change the business and run the business activities. okay? And we're going to focus on change the business activities. But basically, as I've said, it's about allocating resources towards certain types of activities. So in what we found out is that in most corporates that we've encountered on an annual basis, the corporate is quite hectic for at least a quarter around the budget plans. I mean, we're talking about numerous meetings and these shouting matches that you come across, and yeah, numerous tools which are being employed, whether these are spreadsheets or presentations, to try and basically reconcile the constraints and guidelines that the executives would bring forward, and with the demand, right, with the ambitions of the different business units. So this process is quite hectic. It takes quite a long time, and as I've said, in many cases the nature is similar to these shouting matches, which don't necessarily get us to an optimal plan. Okay. Now, actually, what should happen is that we should go through a structured scrutiny process, okay, in which we basically evaluate each budget request or each demand using a common language. And I'm going to expand on that later on. So what we found out that the lack of the structured scrutiny, the lack of common language, and lack of proper review frameworks or process, it gets us to a substantial waste of budget. And I mean, the figures are quite alarming. We're talking about figures between 5 and 30% of budget which goes to waste. Now, when I'm saying goes to waste, I mean that it's out of focus from the strategic plan perspective. We're not doing the right things. So, and I'm going to expand on that naturally later on. So, I mean, once we have these alarming, figures, then this naturally leads to a decreased chance of meeting our goals. So again, I'd like to ask another question here. This one, it's around budget planning. Again, I'll give you a few moments to respond, and I'll appreciate your response about this one. Okay, thank you very much. So let's move on. So again, just to recap, we've discussed the strategic planning and performance measurement, and we've discussed the budget planning process. Now, what I want to discuss is basically why should budget and performance align? Because traditionally, in many corporates, these are two separate domains, two separate processes. We have the annual budget planning, and we have strategic planning, or actually the performance review sessions, which are held separately. So the reason that I'm saying that we're saying that this should align is that throughout the life cycle of our strategic plan, or the execution part of it, at least, I would say that there are some very interesting touch points between these two domains. So I'm going to describe in a few minutes the mutual feedback between the budget planning and budget review processes, along with performance measurement and performance planning processes. So in a way, it's like a closed loop feedback process in which we may start with planning, and the alignment would get us to a focus alignment. Okay, we would focus our budget around what we feel or what we think that would improve our corporate performance, but we will also align our timelines. Okay, and I'm going to expand on that, but just in a nutshell, every initiative in the budget planning process should be time-phased, should have milestones which are correlated to our performance forecast. And I'm going to expand on that. So this is from the planning perspective. When we start to execute, when we approve our plan and we start to execute, we need to review both our budget performance, whether our initiatives are on budget or on schedule, whether there are any potential risks at indeed executing these initiatives. But we also need to review our performance, our actual performance, because we by identifying issues around budget and performance, we'll be able to fine-tune both, either our forecast around corporate performance or our forecast around the budget consumption. Okay, and I'm going to expand on that naturally in a few minutes. And to complete that, we have a closure or review phases in which we're going to learn and have retrospective analysis to understand, what went well in terms of course, performance and, of course, budget, and fine-tune in the next planning or review cycle. And I'll expand on this one in a minute. So let's start to understand how this is actually done, and I'll recap on the benefits once we understand how this is done, because I'm going to get to details now, which should clear up things. So we start top down, okay? I'm currently focusing on the planning phase. So we start top down. As I've said before, the very basic step towards effective strategy execution is basically allocating budget towards the strategic goals. So we do it in two steps. The first one is to pre-allocate budget towards the change the business activities. So the run the business activities get preserved budget and capacity. So we'll be dealing mostly with the change the business activities. Out of this budget, we're going to pre-allocate budget towards specific strategic goals or our objectives or drivers. What we found out is that in many cases, this ratio will correlate with the corporate priorities. Okay, if the executives would like to spend substantial amount of budget on a particular goal, it usually correlates with their priorities. Though in some cases, you have to explicitly specify the priorities for these goals. Another thing that it's very much recommended to do, because what we're going to see as part of planning is that we would like to reconcile multiple dimensions, the budget, performance, capacity, into a single framework, okay, so we can make better decisions. So what we specify here is that we recommend on adding additional soft constraints to set boundaries and enhance the decision making. And by these constraints, I mean, for example, how much capacity we would like to reserve towards, for example, CapEx or OpEx, and what is our available resource capacity, because it may be a very important constraint in terms of our budget planning process. So these are the very basic top-down things that we would do. We would, as I've said, we would define smart or smarter KPIs associated with these objectives, and we will also associate these KPIs to accountable persons and org units. Okay, and accountability is key. We're going to see that actually once we align budget planning and performance management, we're going to see that there are actually multiple accountabilities involved. Okay, there may be a certain KPI owner, and another manager would be held accountable for, might be held accountable for the underlying activities or the initiatives that we're going to perform in order to improve our business performance. And by getting them to a single framework, or by allowing them to see the impact of changes to these initiatives or changes to these performance measures, they will be able to better communicate and better act on these changes. So yeah, accountability, as I've said, it's key. One of the key things that we should do as part of the budget planning is to highlight the strategic objectives and KPI throughout the planning process, okay? Because let's assume that we don't do that, and this is what usually happens. You see that each business unit will, as part of the budget planning or the annual planning, would raise certain, proposals or initiatives for the annual planning process. Okay, and if these initiatives are detached from our strategic plan, if they don't have it in their state of mind, then we're going to lose focus. We're going to focus on, again, on unimportant things. So if this is their entry point, okay, they have their strategic objectives and KPIs, which is in many cases owned by them. If they have this in mind, they will be able to bring forward quality initiatives, things that they really believe that will help us push the or promote the corporate objectives. Okay, so this bullet here is it's quite key. So again, top down, what we've done, we've defined the constraints, we defined the objectives and KPIs, and we've set some boundaries. And now what we're going to do, we need to bottom up gather requests or demand for budget that would correlate with with these top-down objectives and constraints. So basically, I've mentioned this structured scrutiny before. So the way that we can get to this structured scrutiny is by capturing these requests in a very structured way, so we can get a common language, and so we can also gather decision-making factors. Now, by saying decision-making factors, I mean, apart from the outline information, I'm talking about alignment levels to the strategy, about financial metrics, about risk levels, risk of not doing something, the costs, these kind of metrics. Now, I can tell you that every corporate has its own flavor towards these decision-making factors, but the whole idea here is to try and agree on a common language. And one of the artifacts of these common language that to make it more tangible, we can calculate priority scores or automatically rank the demands according to these agreed upon decision-making factors. So we can agree on these factors, we can agree on the weighting, and finally get to an automatic ranking or an agreed upon ranking as a starting point. Now, if the corporate is mature enough to define these KPIs or these smart KPIs to measure success, what we should do as part of this bottom-up practice, we should try and forecast the relative change on the KPIs expected from this budget request. So let's assume that we have, I don't know, a certain mobility program, and we believe that this would get us both, expansion of new monthly clients, but it will also decrease the number of reverting clients. Now, we're talking about relative measures here, and the reason that it's recommended to do so is that we can identify or quantify the contribution of multiple items towards a single KPI. Usually, what would happen is that we'll have a set of KPIs defined and multiple initiatives aimed at improving these KPIs, right? And I'm going to cover this in a few minutes, but we're going to see that one of the most important things to do is to analyze the budget plan from the KPIs or the strategic objectives perspective. Because when we want to prioritize between demand, I'm going to assume that we have resource constraints or we have some sort of constraints. We cannot do everything that we wish to do as part of the plan. So we'll need to prioritize. So one of the most powerful tools to get to an optimal plan is by reviewing the plan from the KPI and objective perspective. And I'm going to touch this in a few minutes. So as I've said, it's recommended to have basically define the relative change that is forecasted on specific KPIs. It's also important to time phase the contribution, right? Because again, we would like to be able to align the initiative timeline, okay, the activity milestone with our targets, with our KPI targets. Again, if I've specified that as a corporate, I'd like to increase my number of premium clients by 50% within a year, then if I'm going to see that certain initiatives would get me to this improvement, but only after 5 years, then perhaps these are irrelevant, right? And what I can tell you that again, it's a two-way feedback, right? It's mutual feedback, because in some cases we start with a very ambitious target setting, but once we understand what's actually feasible, then we may fine-tune our business performance forecast so that high-level executives, board-level executives may get much more informed decision, better decisions, basically. So this is what I refer to by saying that KPI targets may be fine-tuned to adapt to what's actually achievable. So this is a very important touch point between the budget and performance. Okay, so after we've basically captured or we've put in place our vision, objectives, KPIs, and constraints, and we've also collected the bottom-up, the demands for initiatives, then now we may be able to prioritize. Now, prioritization of these items should be done in multiple passes. Okay, the first pass, this is a best practice here, is to basically sit down with each individual business unit, pick the best initiatives based on these decision-making factors. Of course, as I've said, one of the most important things is to review the plan from the KPI contribution perspective, okay, and focus their minds around it. But we definitely need to involve additional decision-making factors such as the costs and risk factors. We need to combine automatic and manual ranking methods. So as I've said, automatic, it's based on these agreed upon weighting and decision-making factors. So this is the first pass. The end result of this first pass is that out of the initial pipeline of initiatives proposed by the business units, we're going to get to a subset of the best ones in the business unit view. Then we're going to have an overall view in which we need to review the budget from multiple perspectives, the contribution to the KPIs of the performance, from the business unit perspective, CapEx, OpEx, or any other dimension that is applicable on the corporate. Because each perspective actually tells us a bit of a different story, and it would indicate both on the degree of balance, and also it would indicate about our performance forecast, okay, or on our business performance forecast. One of the key things in these kind of sessions that we have to do, we need to expose. Even though I've said that we should employ automatic ranking in these priority scores, it's actually best practice to expose the underlying factors rather than encapsulating them. Okay. We don't want to put too much trust, I would say, in these automatic measures. We would like to expose so that we can get the buy-in of everyone on this plan, because one of the major things about successful strategy execution is getting the buy-in of people and getting them engaged, etc. So again, one of the major things that we should do as part of this overall view is to basically define or inspect more than one alternative, okay? And we may employ different what if scenarios. What would happen if we only include high priority items, etc. So this is the second pass. The third pass is, after we've picked the best scenario, then we will go again and collaborate with the business unit managers about the items that we wish to include in plan, and perhaps there may be variances between the approved budget and requested budget. So they may need to fine-tune their demands a bit before we actually approve the plan. Okay, but this would be like the final pass on our prioritization phase. So finally, once we basically we've picked the best scenario, we've fine-tuned the plan according to the revised budget, the items that we wish to include, then we need to baseline the plan. Okay, we're going to approve and baseline the plan, and we're going to baseline both the included and excluded initiatives, and we're going to baseline the decision-making factors along with the KPI contribution. Okay, because later on, this baseline will serve both change control processes, and I'm going to expand on that a bit, and our learning processes, because we would like to improve from cycle to cycle. So this basically concludes the planning part of this alignment. The next part is to align budget and performance in the execution phase. So let's assume that we've already approved our plan, and now we need to make sure that everything goes as planned. And actually, I can say that more importantly, we need to be able to react fast and well in case of changes that occur. And changes always occur. Okay, issues happen, right? It could be issues around the particular initiatives. It could be that the business landscape has changed a bit and we need to fine-tune things, but we need to have the proper processes to be able to react on these changes and shift our priorities and shift and readjust our forecast in case things change. So the key thing here, I would say, and that the leading process is performance review. And again, I mentioned this before, traditionally performance reviews and budget reviews are in many cases are separate domains or separate processes, but actually these should be tied together, because again we're going to see this mutual feedback kind of thing happening once we detect issues either in the performance level or budget level, and I'm going to expand on that in a minute. So we need to review performance on a timely basis. Okay, we cannot wait for the next planning cycle for the next year to understand whether we've indeed met our goals, we've indeed spent the budget on what's important, and that we haven't breached our boundaries, right? This needs to be on a monthly or quarterly basis, where we review both the budget or the initiatives as well as the performance, the actual performance. And what we're going to do in these sessions, we're going to identify off-target KPIs. And we're going to review associated initiatives with their corresponding milestones, because again, off-target KPIs, the root cause of an off-target KPI could be either because we simply picked the wrong initiatives, we didn't do what we needed to do in order to promote our performance. But it could also be that we did pick the right things, but we didn't do the right things right? We didn't meet our initiative level milestones, and now we've started to put things, these KPIs at risk. Now there's a note here about the fact that this may be a bit tricky, because there's actually not a one-to-one relationship between KPIs and initiatives, but I'm going to touch this later on if we have time. So again, we're going to review these off-target KPIs. We're going to review the business landscape. We're going to ask ourselves whether things have changed. We may need to fine-tune KPIs. We may need to fine-tune the initiatives and the budget around these initiatives. So basically, we're reviewing the business landscape, we're reviewing performance, the KPI health indicators, and initiative health indicators. And I'll expand on this one in a minute. As I've said, there's a mutual feedback here. A non-healthy KPI may have an impact on associated initiatives, right? If we detect that something is off target, it may be that we've picked the wrong initiatives, or these initiatives aren't aligned with the updated performance targets. And it's the other way around as well. Vice versa, a non-healthy initiative may have an impact on associated KPIs. If something goes off schedule or something is at great risk, an initiative, then it may have an impact on the KPI. Okay. Now, basically, the relevant health indicators on the KPIs are there are three main health indicators on each KPI. The first one is target. Okay, the simple question of whether we're reaching our targets as planned. And again, we're talking about time phase KPIs, so we may have checkpoints, right? Internal checkpoints to see that the trend is as planned, right? So a problem with this health indicator may or should trigger an underlying initiative review. Again, are we doing what's necessary to meet our goals? Another health indicator around KPIs is around issues that are raised by the KPI owner. Again, I've mentioned this before. There may be multiple owners here, the KPI owner and the initiatives owner. So if, again, something is, we didn't, let's assume that we haven't yet reached our checkpoint, the target checkpoint, but we already identify that things aren't going as planned, right? So an issue may be raised by the KPI owner, which would trigger the involvement of additional stakeholders to identify the root cause, whether this is due to the initiatives, lack of budget, etc. And we have the, I would say, more explicit indicator, which is about the propagated associated initiative state. So if something goes off schedule, off budget, or if there are any quality or risk-related issue on the initiative, it may put the KPI at risk and eventually impact our performance, actual performance and performance forecast. Now, I've mentioned this, I think, twice, but it's worthwhile mentioning this again because this is the key thing here. By working in this closed loop feedback between the KPI owners and the initiative owners, it enables better collaboration between them. Okay, they would be able to basically highlight insights. Each each one would have its own domain of insights, but once they communicate on a single framework, then they would be able to make better decisions, and the corporate altogether will be able to make better decisions this way. Okay, in addition to the execution, to these performance review processes as part of execution, we have to talk about change control, right? Change control is actually, it's crucial for proper execution governance. Basically, we're talking about changes versus the baseline. So, and then by saying baseline, I mean both the initiative level baseline as well as the KPI level baseline. So if things have changed, before we actually commit the change, before we actually change something, we need to inspect it closely. We need to conduct what-if analysis on each change so we can understand the expected performance and budget, the impact on the performance and impact on budget. So we need to closely review it and we need to approve it, of course, every change. And later on, for retrospective analysis, this will also be very useful to understand, which changes have been made on our plan, and we're going to ask ourselves, why did we encounter these changes? Some changes are external, but they're and perhaps unavoidable. But in many cases, we detect, avoidable changes, and we can learn from these for the next cycle. So the next phase is the review or closure phase. Now, for high maturity corporates, actually the closure part is more like a formality. Because the review is done on an ongoing basis, they don't wait for the formal closure phase to have the retrospective and to review planning versus actuals. Okay, but in any case, it's worthwhile to conduct the lessons learned sessions to understand both from the KPI perspective as well as the initiatives perspective. Which things have performed well, which items have underperformed, which changes were applied, as I've said. And this kind of session will, or the minutes from these sessions will feed the next planning and review cycle. So let me just recap on what we've just went through today about the benefits, right? So we're talking about mutual feedback, which basically feeds three main phases of strategy execution. So the first one is the planning. So by aligning budget and performance, we can have better focus on our plans. We can promote the best initiatives under the existing constraints because, again, we're going to be focused on the strategic objectives, on the performance. We're going to be more specific, right? We're going to specify the contribution level to these specific KPIs and pick the best ones under the existing constraints. We're going to align performance and initiatives on the time dimension, which is crucial. Again, we're going to detect cases in which initiatives are simply irrelevant because they're going to improve things out of the time frame that we actually needed to improve. And naturally, we're going to reduce waste. Once we have better focus, then our budget is more focused, and once we work in a more structured way, then we're going to have reduced waste around manager time. I can tell you that from our experience, corporates that have underwent this structured process were able to shorten the planning cycles from something around a quarter, right, like 3 months to around a month. Again, due to structured process and to these timely reviews. So that's the benefits around planning. The benefits around execution is that we have ongoing alignment of performance and initiative timelines, right? If we detect that a certain initiative goes off schedule, then we may be able to act fast, right? We will fine-tune the milestone. We may fine-tune the budget around it. We may fine-tune the performance forecast. So the key thing here is that we'll be able to act fast and well, right? If things don't go as planned. And it will also enhance collaboration, the ongoing collaboration around things, so we can make better decisions and have better communication within our corporate. And finally, on these review or closure phases, we may have learning and retrospective analysis to improve the next planning and review cycle. So first of all, I hope that you've enjoyed this webinar. Just to give you a hint on how, given that you understand the benefits of this alignment, then how do we move forward, right? So it's about three main pillars. Okay, the first one is people. We need to engage the key executives. We need to engage key people, key stakeholders, and get their buy-in in order to implement such process. It's about defining the processes. Okay, this is the process is basically the foundation of a successful strategy execution. So we're talking about three main processes here, which are breaking down the goals to these KPIs, the budget planning process, and the ongoing performance reviews. And it's very much recommended to incorporate a system, an IT system, to both to enable this process, but also to accelerate this. Okay. First of all, because manually maintaining such process, as you understand, I mean, we're combining multiple dimensions here, and quite a few stakeholders need to be involved. So manually maintaining such process is quite challenging. But what I would also want to say is that an IT system can actually accelerate the process implementation. We've came across quite a few corporates which um, have said that they're still at the phase, at the stage in which they haven't really defined their KPIs and they need to get their minds around it. But actually, a system can accelerate this process because a system like this can come with best practice, industry best practice, and structured processes to help them accelerate this process implementation. So if you'd like to hear more on how MySinglePoint can accelerate and enable performance to budget alignment, then please feel free to contact Guy Lifshitz. I'm going to launch another poll here, another set of questions, or another question around this part. So I'd appreciate your response. And in any case, yeah, I'd like to thank you very much for participating in this webinar. I hope that it was interesting and useful for you. So thank you very much.